Yeah, today I want to talk about the genetics and the evolution of weeds. So we start with the weed evolution. Agricultural practices cause soil disturbance. Now, this could have taken probably 12,000 years ago when the former agriculture was initiated. We know weeds grow in disturbed areas or where agricultural activities occur. So weeds should be undergoing rapid adaptive evolution in order to escape eradication. Because where weeds are growing, there's a lot of disturbances because herbicides could be used or mechanical weeding could be used. So it's likely that weeds may not complete their life cycles. But we know in most cases they do complete their life cycles and produce seeds. Well, weeds are defined as plants growing where they are not wanted or just plants out of place. The important issues concerning weeds, I'll explain some of these terms later. There's what is known as genetic drift, gene flow, and the natural selection. Two aspects of weed evolution. We may ask the following two questions. What are the wild and domesticated ancestors for weeds? That is the first question. The second question is, what genetic mechanisms account for the traits that have enabled weeds to successfully invade these agricultural environments? So we may be addressing these questions as we discuss weed evolution. There are just about 250 weed species which are problematic worldwide. We have two broad categories of weeds. Number one, we have got we have got weeds which closely relate to domestic species. And these are known as conspecifics, or plants belonging to the same species. They can also be congeneric species. These are plants belonging to the same genus. So the first group of weeds could be closely related to domestic species or to crops. Then the second group is not related to crops. So those that lack crop relatives. Now, these ones, we have what are known as de novo mutations or pre-existing standing allele variation. For weedy crop relatives. So we want to understand the origin of weeds. Where do these weeds come from? Probably you may need to refer to this reference, Elstrand et al., 2010. Now I want to look at the mechanisms of weed colonization. We know these weeds actually invade agricultural fields. So plants which are agricultural weeds are capable of colonizing arable areas. I mean, they should be able to grow across many environments. I mean, they are adapted to many environments. So they are generalists and they are efficient in dispersal mechanisms. So they can infest various fields across many areas. They are described as phenotypic plastic genotypes, which means they are adapted to a wide environments. Probably if these were crops, probably this is what we would want. A crop genotype which can be grown across many environments. So these weeds, you can find them across many environments. They are adapted to grow and compete for resources in agricultural fields or disturbed areas. Now, weed species can undergo evolution or changes to acquire traits needed to colonize disturbed areas. You can have a look at this reference, DeWitt and Harlan in 1975. Now we can have colonizers, which are weeds, that evolve or they already have traits for survival on a disturbed land. So you have these plants which can undergo some changes so that they are suited to agricultural fields or disturbed land, or they already have these traits which makes them survive in disturbed environments. Now, some of the important issues which occur to weeds are demographic bottlenecks. What it means is that you may have small populations of weeds with limited genetic variation. So you tend to get uniform, probably uniform genes or homozygous condition in weeds. In fact, most of the weeds are homozygous. They have a homozygous condition. If we are going to get a genetic diversity, we may have some weed populations or weed species which are growing close to other species so that they can cross-pollinate, so that they can form hybrids through cross-pollination. So we may have hybridization between wild species and the domesticated crops. Domesticated crops could escape cultivation and evolve into weed populations. So some of these weeds could evolve from domesticated crops. Probably there are some wild sorghums which could have evolved from cultivated sorghums. Or you may start with a crop which may change to a weed, what we call de-domestication. So we have de-domesticated weeds which may actually invade the agricultural fields. They may hybridize and increase variation or genomic diversity. Now, on this slide, I want to show you various ways in which weeds can arise. We may have what we call wild plants. Remember, when you open a new field, there may not be plants which you call weeds. It could be just natural vegetation there. But after disturbing the soil, later on you will see some plants invading this patch. These could be referred to as wild plants. And these wild plants will become your weeds at A, or these wild plants may be changed by breeders to crops through this route. And you may have a crop and a wild plant which make a cross and form a weed. Or you may have a crop which may undergo de-domestication and becomes a weed. Anyway, this will become clear as we show you some of the examples. There is evolution of crop mimicry. We have weeds which resemble crops. For example, barnyard grass or echinoclea oryzicora, which looks like rice. It mimics rice. Now, Echinoclea crasgari can undergo hybridization. Now, if it undergoes this process, it may produce different plants which may become weeds. So you may have Echinoclea crasgari, which may be crossed to the cultivated rice. Now, the Echinoclea crasgari can grow in many environments. These are characteristics of a generalist plant. A generalist plant can grow in many environments. This is Echinoclea crasgari, which looks like rice. It may mimic rice. Then we have got Echinoclea oryzicora, which is also a weed. And this is the rice plant. Now, these three plants, they may form crosses and produce weeds. Now I want to talk about the Amaranthus species. The Amaranthus species may develop resistance if you spray them with herbicides. This is occurred in Central and South America. This is adaptive evolution. Now, if you spray the herbicides, there could be genetic variation or what are known as de novo mutations, or just changes in the genes of this weed. There could also be hybridization between what I am is actually Amaranthus. There could be hybridization between Amaranthus species, which brings about herbicide resistance. Now, in Colonization canadensis, there's been evolution of herbicide resistance in the wild to weed plants. Remember we said when you open a new page, there won't be plants which you call weeds. The first plants which you see, probably these are wild plants, which will, over time, will be changed to weeds. Now, we want to look at the evolutionary processes or changes which take place within a plant, which results in weeds. So let's say you have opened a new field. You start with the wild plants invading that field or colonizing that field. These plants will be converted to weeds. So you have colonization of arable lands by wild plant species in the beginning. That is when you are opening a field for cultivation. Now, you may find that the cultivated fields could be in crop production for a number of years. During that period, the wild plants are subjected to selection process. And this selection process will create new weeds. So what these new weeds will try to sort of escape the weed management techniques. So it is important to note that while
Doc.
Yes.
Isaac is requesting to join.
Okay. Okay. Are you in? Is he in?
No, I don't think he is. No, he's joined now.
Okay. Okay, let me. Okay, we're talking about the change of plant from being wild to a weed. And I said, when you open a new field, you may start with wild plants, which will evolve or change to weeds with the time. Some of the examples are Striga montica, which can be found in a wide range of environmental conditions. It can also parasitize different hosts. Now, sometimes we can use markers or AFLP, amplified fragment length polymorphism, just to determine the genetic makeup of these plants. So you can collect weeds from various geographic areas and run AFLP so that you can find whether they are related or not. So Striga montica has been found to be outcrossing. It can form hybrids with other species. It is a generalist, which means it can grow in many environments, also or bunch species. So this is Striga montica. This is Orange, which is also a parasitic plant. We want to look at the hybrid to weed. We can have hybridization of crops with the wild relatives. And this can produce crop weed complexes. We have got an example of evolution of weedy sunflower. There are some sunflowers which can become weeds. A sunflower grows in North America. This crop was exported to Europe. Once in Europe, we now had some weedy sunflower strains coming out of this hybrid, which was being used in Europe, in North America, but in Europe, it later on developed into a weed. I don't know, you could have seen some of the sunflowers which are weeds. For this one, which is highly branched, you could have seen this weedy sunflower. It comes from the actual sunflower crops. We have what we call crop weed introgression. Now, we may have a cultivated crop crossing with a wild plant to produce weeds. Like what happens to weedy beets, Beta vulgaris. Probably we may not have this problem. It could be in Europe, where we have cultivated beets crossing with wild beets to produce some hybrids which are weeds. So this could be an example of Beta vulgaris or wild beet. It has got a sort of a bulb. Then we have got weedy sorghums. Probably you have experienced that there are some sorghums, even in this country, which are wild sorghums, which are weeds. We've got what is known as Johnson grass, sorghum haripens. These are weeds in the USA. We don't have Johnson grass in this country. We are just using them as examples. Then sugarcane is the sorghum bicolor. This is actually a weed. We don't have sugarcane again in Zimbabwe, but we can use them as examples for weedy sorghums. Now, Johnson grass can cross with cultivated sorghum. This is what is known as genetic introgression from crop to weed. Sugarcane as well can also hybridize with the grain sorghum. It's also another example of crop to weed introgression. So you have weeds and crops making crosses, producing progeny which are weeds. This is sorghum haripens. It's rhizomatous. This is our cultivated sorghum. So you can have this sorghum haripens making a cross with this actual sorghum. And this produces the offspring, which is a weed. So we may start with a crop which is converted to a weed. So we've got a few verified examples. Some of these we may not have them in Zimbabwe, but we just use them as an example. Weedy rye or sickle cereal and weedy rice Oryza sativa. Now, weedy rye is a problem in wheat fields. Now, we may have a volunteer rye. It is cultivated, which will change into a weed through evolution. And it will become a problem. We may also have weedy rice, which could have descended from the cultivated rice through the process of de-domestication. We call it de-domestication, that process of converting a crop into a weed. So this is weedy ryegrass. Ryegrass is cultivated, but this one is now a weed. We know rice is cultivated, but we also have weedy rice. Now I want to look at the changes in the genes, genetic evolution. Now, this can cause what we call weeds to have a rapid adaptation to the agriculturally disturbed environments. Probably these plants which come in to invade agricultural fields could have pre-adaptations. They already have the traits required to colonize the agricultural fields. Or some plants may need the traits or may acquire traits to thrive in the disturbed areas. But some plants already have these traits. Some of the traits which are important, competitive ability and persistence to remain in agricultural settings are some of the important traits of weeds. Now, some of unique characteristics of weeds were described by Baker in 1965 for an ideal weed. We've got rapid growth, high nutrient use efficiency, seed dormancy, efficient seed dispersal, crop mimicry, herbicide resistance. I know according to Baker, I think he has about 12 characteristics for an ideal weed. We'll just use these few. So these traits which were described by Baker in 1965, where do they come from? How do the weeds acquire them? So origin of adaptive traits. These could be caused by, number one, standing variation. Number two, introgression. And number three, new mutation. So some of these important characteristics of weeds are a result of these processes. So the above are sources of adaptive traits in agricultural weeds. So we'll explain these three adaptive, these three processes as we move. Now, I just want to explain standing variation using an example of the color of rice, which is caused by what is known as proanthocyanidin pigmentation. This is just the red color of the seeds of the rice, which is actually a wheat. That rice is known as Oryza rufipogon, or wild rice. So it has got seeds which are red, as opposed to white seeds of the rice. I know we've got some rice which is red. I'm not sure whether this is wild rice. I know in Zimbabwe we've got this. Is it brown or yeah? It looks like brown rice. But there's some which is reddish, sort of reddish, which has got a reddish sort of color. I don't know whether this is the same as Oriza roof pogon. So what could have happened during rice domestication or improvement of rice through breeding, to use the language which is used in probably in breeding? During breeding, this color was lost, and it is represented by the RC gene, which encodes proanthocyanidin synthesis, which is responsible for the reddish color. So once that gene is lost, you have a white color, which appear in domesticated rice. So weeds have inherited this red pericarp phenotype as a result of what is known as standing variation, because these plants are trying to adapt to the agricultural environment through this standing variation. It's like a kind of breeding which is occurring in weed species, which makes them able. Hello.
I was with the dean. Apana ndangoita vangotivhunza that how is e-learning going? Ndangoti click.
Okay.
This is what we want. Did Dr. Mabasa yes? Did Dr. Mabasa yes? And this is what we want. Saka is now. Saka ndibi moto yedu so far before. Now I need that link. You want to me that link? That one do you want to go in this?
Okay.
Saka I didn't go mirror.
Okay.
Donc, I think it's high time that both my promotions here.
Yeah,
Gadzira, and we need to mention now one of our varieties.
All right.
And all innovation in multi.
Okay.
That one. Otherwise, this was. We need to mention.
Oh, all right.
So mention two combinations that mention this one made this.
Okay.
To go to the uniform. I also want to try. I need to apply for full professorship.
Okay.
Now move us on, but in those 3 months is the request. Funny window the 3 months.
Oh.
People man got to put a hope.
Yeah, this one.
To apply to pay that then. Can I give a sugar 15 go apply for full?
Kutanga swika ndifuki.
Atakangosvika closer to there tochigona totamba sei. Nyika igoverenga wangu akashota ne10 mapepa. Ndinoona ikutamba pa 3 10 divided by 3 papers per month. Tinomeka succeed. Because what I want to do toda kuti zvipere. Nyaya iripo yekuti zvini izvi guys. Number 1, people should know kuti very political.
Okay.
Now we are working with the little resources, so we don't compare you ne Pesia professor of Oxford.
Okay.
You see. Tutaura zvinhu zvatinazvo muno.
Okay.
Saka problem yedepartment ndokuya painoita let down vanhu vayo. Sezvinonzi dok.
Yeah, this was.
Ngatimbobva muspirit yekumborwisana sezvinonzi we are brothers
All
and
right.
sisters. Culture yedu inorwisana nehama. Ngatimbovitsvagai kuti hama dziri timbondofaita iko.
Okay.
Timbosiyana ari vatorwa.
Yeah, this was.
Tomboita zvokuti timove.
Yeah. Yeah, so ndichazokwira.
Nyaya yandisiri kuda kunzwa at this time ndekuti Jona rakati ribvumo. Asi ndambonzwa nyaya iyoyo sachiyapisini. Iyoyo nyaya iyoyo kana mapepa evanhu tinyora mapepa pane munhu akambouya panapa akaita chido chokuti inini I am more senior in the department. It's something like that.
Yeah. Election. Yeah. And you know, editor.
Sorry, Doc. Are you teaching now?
Mm-hmm.
What class?
Yeah.
Huh?
Okay, sorry for this disturbance. So I was talking about this color which is associated with the rice, which is a weed. And I said it has got red seeds. And these red seeds are caused by the RC gene. And the kani chiripo bishara. Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, sorry for the disturbance again. I was talking about the red seeds for the rice, which is a weed, and the white seeds for the domesticated rice. And we were saying that during breeding or improvement of the weed rice into domesticated rice, the RC gene was lost. That's why our rice is white. Although I know there's brown rice. Now, weeds have actually inherited the red pericarp phenotype as a result of what is known as standing variation. So there's some sort of breeding which is going on within the weeds. And we refer to it as standing variation. As of you may be interested to note that pericarp pigmentation or this color of seeds is a role in dormancy. And we know dormancy is one of the traits for weediness. So this is wild red rice, which is a weed, but I think we do have some rice which is used by people in Zimbabwe, which is either brown or reddish rice. Then one of the characteristics of weeds is dispersal. I mean, weeds have got mechanisms to disperse their seeds. It's a trait for weeds so that they can colonize other areas. We have what is known as the shattering phenotype. Now, this seed dispersal is a characteristic of wild and weedy rice. Now, during breeding, the shattering gene was lost in trying to improve our crops. So the weedy rice can freely disperse their seeds because they require this shattering phenotype. And it is controlled by the SH4 major gene. And of course, it was lost coming. Yeah, Misha. Yeah, you're right. The teacher. Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
Proceed. I just wanted to update you.
All right.
It's okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Again, sorry for the disturbance. So we said the shattering trait was lost during breeding or domestication. Now, standing variation can also alter the genotype of weeds. Then there is untimely germination, avoidance. Now, weeds may not just germinate. The reason is that they are trying to avoid destruction. So most weed species have got this trait. Temperature cues. There are some weeds. Again, we are going to use the weed rice, which is found in China. Now, this weed rice can germinate at lower temperature after cold treatment than rice. But rice can germinate at the same temperature from different places. But wheat rice has got a certain temperature which can allow it to germinate. This is also controlled by genes, but the gene which influences the germination process is not known at the moment. But these weeds have got a characteristic temperature requirement for germination, especially the weedy rice. In China, there's an area where there's a weedy rice. They call it the northern latitudes. So seeds collected from this place can germinate at a lower temperature after cold treatment. Now we've got weed species which are naturally adapted to disturbed habitats or agricultural fields. Probably these weed species already have genes for adaptation. They are pre-adapted already. For example, the Amaranthus species. For example, where herbicides are applied, they could quickly develop resistance. Standing variation or pre-adaptation could be responsible for herbicide resistance in weedy ryegrass, Lorium rigidium. So just like Amaranthus species. We also have the same characteristic in Hypomea peperia, which appear to tolerate glyphosate. This weed resist glyphosate application. But what is interesting is that these areas were never exposed to the herbicide. Because usually some weeds resist after continuous use of herbicides. But it appears some of these weeds already have genes for resistance. So I want to have a look at some wild weed plants that have crop relatives. You know, there are some plants, when you open a new field, you start with these wild plants, which eventually become weeds. But there are also some plants which have crop relatives, like sunflowers. We have got genes necessary for adaptation in agricultural systems, which already exist in the wild plants. No wonder why they tend to remain in the agricultural fields. So in sunflowers, we do have some plants which are already weeds. So if you open up a new field, they can quickly become weeds. Secondly, we have got rapid evolution of herbicide resistance in the barnyard grass. This could be due to novel adaptive mutation. This could be due to the changes, probably in the genes within the plant, which causes herbicide resistance. Now, the examples I have been talking about are due to standing variation. So I was trying to explain this standing variation. Now I'll talk about introgression. These are some of the processes which make the weeds acquire those unique characteristics. Now, for introgression, we have an example from the US. We have got a US wheat rice, which has been shown to contain growth-related gene SD1. Now, this was passed on to wheat rice through introgression. So the gene was within the local rice cultivars, but it is now found in weeds. Normally, the weeds are shorter, slow growing, and early flowering. They acquired SD1 gene from the cultivated rice through introgression. Herbicide resistance. These are the weeds. Normally, they are killed by the herbicide, but eventually, the herbicide will fail to control them. In USA, we now have a herbicide-resistant rice. Now, the weeds which now resist herbicides could be a result of crop weed hybridization. So the crosses between the crop and the weed results in weeds which resist herbicides. Coming. Hello. Hello. Oh, yes. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Sorry again for the disturbance. Now we have got examples in California where we have got wild radish, Raphanosa raffinistrum. It's an agricultural weed and also an occupant of natural areas which is resistant to herbicides. The reason why it can resist herbicides is that it has acquired the genes through hybridization with a crop. So you can have a weed which crosses with a crop. Then the subsequent weeds, when they infest the fields, then they are no longer killed by the herbicides. Now, there could be weeds which are not crop relatives. The life history may or may not be due to de novo adaptive mutation, or the life history is not due to changes in the genes. Probably standing variation could also be responsible for the adaptive traits. Now, wild plants which turn into weeds probably have got this pre-adaptive, or they already have genes to become agricultural weeds. This is wild radish weed. Which probably already has the genes from wild plants. Then let us look at the mutation types. So which types of mutation are more likely to underlie phenotypic and adaptive change? Now, mutation refers to changes within the genes. And when there are these changes, it may cause a plant to display these weedy characteristics. Now, some of the mutations may cause the weed to become resistant to herbicide application. Mutation is simply probably a change in the amino acids, because the genes are composed of amino acids. Now I'm going to give you some examples of these mutation types. There are some herbicides, there are some weeds which resist herbicides. For example, it could be grass killers. Now, these weeds possess what is known as acetolactate synthase, or ALS. This is actually an enzyme which is responsible for the production of amino acids. The other name for this herbicide, for this enzyme, is acetohydroxy acid synthase. It's the same enzyme. Now, any alteration to this enzyme will cause resistance to some herbicides. So we now have a resistance to ARS herbicides in about 125 weed species which are resistant. The reason why we have them is that of this evolution of weed species. Because during the usage of the herbicides, weeds have been changing. And we now have a population which resist the use of herbicides. The reason why these herbicides are resisting is because this enzyme has been changed within the weeds. Well, you may be interested to note that there are about 22 different amino acid substitutions at 7 sites. This is about the ARS gene. It is these changes which can bring about resistance. We also have similar findings in another enzyme known as acetyl coenzyme carboxylase, which is responsible for lipid metabolism. Probably later on when we do herbicides later within this module, we'll come on to explain these. But at the moment, you may need to remember that if you continue to use grass killers, which are herbicides, eventually some weeds will resist this herbicide. It's because there will be alterations in this enzyme, acetolactate synthase. Now, with the Parma amaranth or Amaranthus parmeri, this weed normally it is killed by glyphosate. But there is now a population of Amaranthus which can resist use of glyphosate. Now, glyphosate inhibits, again, this will become clear when we talk about herbicides. Glyphosate inhibits what is known as EPSPS. This is the long name. It's easier to remember, EPSPS. Now, if glyphosate can inhibit EPSPS, the plant can actually die. But if the plant is able to make a lot of this enzyme, then the plant is going to survive. So we now have some amaranthus which can produce excessive EPSPS, and it will survive glyphosate application. Now that population of Amaranthus was developed through evolution of these weeds. Now let us look at the evolutionary traits. You may be interested to note that weeds may form seed without pollinator visits. I mean, some plants need insects to cause cross-pollination. As insects move from flower to flower. Yeah, with weeds, what is common is that they may not need to be visited by insects. They have what is known as autogamy, self-fertilization. It is common with the weeds. No wonder why a small population can, increase through self-fertilization. Of course, another term is agamospermy. Now, outcrossing can also occur. It means different weed species can share pollen. This is aided by wind or generalized flower visitors or by insects. This can be by wind or by insects. Although self-fertilization is common, outcrossing can occur. Now, a single plant which escape weed control can build a colony through self-fertilization. Outcrossing also occurs, which means although weeds have selfing or self-fertilization, now in breeding, you can have what are known as pure lines. So with weeds, we have natural pure lines through selfing. And we can also have hybrids through outcrossing. Now we have got examples of hybrids. This weed, Eupatorium species, is a hybrid genotype. This can actually be through this outcrossing. But there's something interesting about these weeds. We have got what we call anthemictic weeds, which can preserve heterozygous condition. Even if there is selfing, which occurs, still heterozygosity is maintained, although one would expect homozygosity. We also have these conditions, polyploids. This is how the chromosomes are arranged, which maintain heterozygosity, because it is important for survival. We also have pentaploids, arrangement of the chromosomes in the Oxalis species. So weeds may vary from genetic uniformity to genetic diversity. Because with the weeds, the tendency is to form uniform, genetically uniform plants, just like our crops. But because of outcrossing, we can have a genetic diversity. This is important for their survival. Although we produce what we call improved crops through breeding, in the natural environment, these processes are taking place on their own. And we've got local race formation, plasticity. Now, this is selection for adaptation by weeds in disturbed areas. You know, when weeds invade a new area, there could be limitations due to genetic bottlenecks. By genetic bottlenecks, we mean the population of weeds, of a weed which is invading a new area, the population could be small, which means genetic diversity is also limited. There's also inbreeding, and this is likely to form uniform plants or plants with limited variation. So you have erosion of genetic variability. But eventually you have ecological races which are heterogeneous, not homogeneous, because eventually there's going to be cross-pollination which create heterozygous conditions, because this will be necessary for the survival for these weeds. Because the weeds are constantly invading the agricultural fields. So you may have a multiple introduction of sulfurs in an area. Eventually, you may have outcrossing occurring, producing heterozygous conditions. Now, weeds are known to have rapid growth and development to reproduce, to reproductive maturity, because they are existing in agricultural fields. where they can be killed anytime due to weed management. So they need to develop very fast and produce it in order to survive. They are able to do this across many environments. So this is the basis for plasticity. They can quickly allocate carbohydrates to seed production to ensure survival. So they already have the genes for colonization and the regeneration. Now, germination requirements. You may have weed seeds of the same species requiring different germination requirements, having different germination requirements. This is also for survival. A crop may just have one specific germination requirement. You know, it could be temperature, moisture, you know, very specific conditions for germination. But for weeds, it is variable. This is important for a general purpose genotype. So that it can colonize different fields. You can have germination in a variety of environments. They come in. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. All right. Okay. Again, sorry about the disturbance. Now, in Canopodium or Canopodiaceae family, we've got seeds. You know, the same plant produces seeds with the different germination requirements. But it's the same plant. If it was a crop, we would expect it to produce seed with the similar requirements. This also happens in Avena species. It can produce seeds on different parts of the spikelets. And these seeds, which are produced at different positions, will also require different germination requirements. So what we are saying is that a weed can produce seeds which have got different conditions, which require different conditions for germination. This will ensure survival in the field. A photosynthetic pathway. Now, most of the seeds, most of the weeds are in the group of C4 and the CAM pathway. Now, these can survive hot, dry situations because photosynthesis tends to be reduced by some of the conditions. If it is hot and dry, you know, the stomata tends to close. And the C4 and the CAM plants are efficient in utilizing carbon dioxide. So most of these weeds which are in the C4 and some which are CAM plants, you've got an efficient photosynthetic pathway which will enable these weeds to compete in the agricultural fields. Now we've got these weeds, although we have talked a bit about some of these examples, weeds of hybrid crops. You may have Merostera sorghum, pollinated by Sudan grass, Johnson grass, or sorghum arumam. So when you have a weed and a crop cross-pollinating, then the result is that you get weeds. And these weeds, some of these weeds are very difficult to control because they have rhizomes. And they can also reproduce through vegetative reproduction. Crop mimics. Now, in order to avoid weed control measures, the weeds have also evolved in the cropping systems. They have tended to acquire traits which make them look like crops so that they can avoid mechanical weeding. So they develop crop-like traits. We've got examples like Eleuthine indica, which mix Eleuthine coracana, Rhodioborea conkincainensis, which mimics maize, Avena fatua, which looks like wheat, and Hibiscus musae, which looks like cotton. So these weeds have acquired these traits in the agricultural fields so that they escape weed control management. So in conclusion, we may say that the weeds are undergoing evolution to match the weed control regimes because there are a lot of disturbances in the agricultural fields. Well, if we use a lot of herbicides, it doesn't mean we are going to have no weed problems, but weeds which counteract herbicides by resisting them will be the major issue. So there is a sort of arms race between the species and crop management practices. It's like the weeds are already developing new candidates which should occupy agricultural fields. Now, water and nutrients limit production. Probably they may be needed to exploit some of the genes from weeds so that we create good crops. So we should remember that although man is trying to develop good crops for the agricultural fields, we have different hybrids which are grown in the agricultural fields. At the same time, in nature, we have breeding, which is going naturally from weeds. We were also getting good candidates from the weeds, which can match our crops. So we always have these weed problems in the agricultural fields. So I think we need to stop here. Hello?
Hello, Doc.
Yes. Yeah, I've had a lot of disturbances today.
It's all fine.
Okay.
Mm.
So this is it about the evolution of weeds. What we are saying is that what we call weeds, or what we see as weeds in disturbed environments, these plants came from what we call wild. I don't know why they are called wild. The term is wild plants. And these wild plants possess traits to occupy disturbed areas. And as we continue to cultivate these areas, these wild plants will eventually evolve to become weeds, which may give us problems. But other weeds come from crosses between wild plants and our crops, our cultivated crops. And eventually they will give us problems like these sorghums, where we have wild sorghum making crosses with the cultivated sorghum. So we have got weeds of two types. We have got crop relatives and wild plants. These are the origins of weeds in our arable, in the arable areas. Any questions?
Hello, Doc.
Hello.
Yeah, pamanga muchitaura about stand variation. Mukataura kuti zvone some of the weeds anenge atori neresistance before usati watomboisa herbicide. Ndaita a bit of confusion. Can we call it it's resistant or it's tolerance?
Well, yes, they do tolerate the. Yes, they tolerate the herbicide. They are not going to die.
Okay.
Yeah. Normally, for us to get a resistance, we need to subject these weeds to these chemicals for some time. Then we build up resistance.
Okay.
But sometimes you get some weeds which are not going to die because we have applied this herbicide. They already have this. They already have these genes, even if they were not exposed to herbicides. Yeah.
Ndopana ndangobvunza kuti zvoni taiwana weed taridira herbicide, weed harina kufa. Can we call it really resistant because harisati rambobvira raitwa exposed to that chemical? Or inoita kuti kanotorwa hako kabiotype kari tolerant?
Those who try to understand the reason why this happens, they look at the genes. So they may explain this effect due to the genetic makeup of those plants.
Okay.
Yeah. But later on, we may talk of herbicide selectivity and resistance in due course. But I understand you discussed these the characteristics of these weeds.
Yes, we did.
12 of them. Or there were more, I don't know. They are quite unique. And those characteristics are produced by evolution. They are a result of standing variation. Most of them. That's why the weeds are able to withstand, the highly disturbed area. Okay, so I will stop here and proceed with the aquatic weeds.
Pardon.
Okay.